to what Yoko has said and our journey towards the formation of the advisory group. And I think this concern about inadequate coordination between indigenous people and GEF-related policy project process has been there for a long time. And as you mentioned Esther Kamak before, Esther was actually one of the first indigenous persons to go to the GEF network, the GEF Council meeting in Washington. And she realized that there was no participation of indigenous peoples. And also looking at deeper, because she's very key in going deeper into documents and analyzing them. She realized that actually we were not able to get any funding because of some restrictions which had been put in place. And we started a process then. Of course, the process is exactly what Yoko had indicated, that we had Indigenous People Network for Change. By then, Esther Kamak was, and we were in the members of the International Alliance, which we are still in, though it's a bit slow, but we are getting in there. That's where we began the whole process. And the issue of an Indigenous People Task Force was then created, and there was that that we had to have a continuity. And the ones who came after that insisted still to make sure that there are indigenous people's participation, and of course to make sure that we are visible during that. Because the NGOs who were there were louder than us, you know, like stronger than us in terms of discussing issues, and of course at the country level, always indigenous people will shy away from getting funding and so on. So we had to talk to GEF and try to see how can we really be engaged. And thank God for the decade for indigenous peoples, because this was taken up by many establishments. And during this process of forming the International Advisory Group, there was a process, as Yoko has already said. There was quite a process within the regions, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where we had different meetings that were taking place to try and guide a way forward to have an advisory group that could be able to help in terms of the implementation mechanism of the GEF principles and guidelines of engaging indigenous people. And that's how some of us were elected as the members of that group. Now, if you look at the next slide, if you look at the composition of the advisory group, we have 7 members. These 7 members, we have 3 indigenous persons, and that is, one of them is me. There is a representative from Latin America, and then there's a representative also from Asia, who was elected by the indigenous people from Asia, and the other one from Latin America, with quite a process that went on. And then there's one indigenous people representative chosen from the NGO network, indigenous people who have been participating in the NGO. So one of them was chosen to be there, so that at least he or she can be able to give synergies and giving us tips on the process that has been going on. And we have one independent expert drawn from a range of partners and stakeholders. Since we have already some NGOs and other stakeholders who have been partners with GEF, there was one who was decided to be chosen from there, so that he can also bring the expertise from that area. And of course, these representatives, they work with indigenous people in different places, in different parts in the country, and that is Gonzalez from IUCN, whereby you know very well the relationship between IUCN and indigenous peoples. And then there is also one representative among the NGO partner agencies. That one now is for GEF to select one of the partner agencies to bring also some synergies and to be able to bring up the work of those agencies to GEF. And that, I think, is from UNDP. UNDP, as you know, there are quite some partners in terms of implementation, like the small grants program is in UNDP. So just as well to have such a person, because he can then be able to help us in terms of accessing that money. And then, of course, we have the GEF Indigenous People Focal Point, who serves as the secretariat, and that is Yoko. She's the one who is the one that we communicate with and is a key person in that. What are the key functions? And provide guidance and experts advice to the GEF Indigenous People Focal Point on the operationalization of the GEF principles and guidelines. That includes modalities to enhance dialogue among Indigenous people and GEF, like what we are doing now, what we did in the morning, and if she was staying for at least the whole week, we could have been able to maybe even engage her more. And those who are not here today could engage her more, but this is still a good opportunity. And then modalities and specific activities for enhancing Indigenous people's capacity to engage in GEF projects and processes. For a long time, Indigenous people have actually complained a lot about maybe some of the bigger mega projects that have been funded by GEF, and also the medium-sized projects. Some of them are implemented in Indigenous people's lands, and they are not informed, they don't even know what happens there. So it was very important to make sure that at least we can be able to discuss that and let the people, we as an Indigenous network, can be able to inform the other people what's happening, and at least be informed that these projects are there. And of course, input to the GEF Indigenous People Focal Point related to the review and updating of the guidelines. So the guidelines can always be, reviewed, but at least they need to have some guidelines, and they need to have people to advise them. And then help in the input to the GEF Indigenous People Focal Point on resources and tools that can be used to enhance implementation of the guidelines. This is also very, very important, especially when we discuss and at the community level what is needed, at what level do we need these guidelines and how can they be used. And we also help in the input on the identification and strengthening of financial arrangements to support Indigenous people's effort to protect their rights and effectively manage their resources. One of the key challenges we had in the past is that even if Indigenous people want to apply for a medium-sized project that is from 300,000 and top, you had to have matching finances, okay? And when we were doing that for the International Alliance with Esther, it was very, very difficult to have people to support with the, to contribute to that. And that is one of the things we want to know, the modalities on how can it be done without a lot of stress for Indigenous people. And of course, the other function is to maintain effective outreach with appropriate Indigenous people's organization and relevant communities, because without us bringing those networks and communities to try and inform GEF, they will not be able to know. For example, now we have the Indigenous people from developed countries. They cannot access that fund. But is there a possibility, this is now the question, is there a way they can still be able to participate? How and when? Maybe she will be able to answer. And there are also those from developed countries who cannot be able to access because they don't have access to other facilities that are needed. And that's a tricky thing that we as the advisory group can be able to advise on the better ways of reaching out to those communities. And then if you look at the operations, next slide, then when we met for the first time, we said that we could meet twice in a year. And that's where initially we thought we could. Then as needed, we can be able to see how we can meet maybe even more times and so on. And then of course the chair is elected among Indigenous representatives to the group, and this rotates. After 2 years, 1 year it can rotate, so that at least the other members also from the other regions can be able to see. And you can see members serve 2 years term. We are just beginning the RIT, and then after 2 years we can have other newcomers to come and serve. But we are also, the members who are there can also be eligible to serve for 2 terms. And it's all voluntary. It's not that there is any salary there, it's just a voluntary kind of work. And responsibility for developing and adapting implementation is a 2-year work plan that we make it. You have a 2-year work plan. And then members do not receive, this is what I've just said, remuneration, but receive travel support. So if we have to go to Washington, we just go, like when we come here, you are paid your ticket and of course your allowance while you are there, and the GEF takes care of the hotel and so on. this is just, it helps in terms of meeting and coordinating the issues. And then the 2-year work plan, as you can see, is financing arrangements to expand the number of GEF Indigenous Peoples projects, because they are fewer. They could be lumped sometimes with others, so you can't know whether this is Indigenous Peoples activity or not. So we, at least now, it will be that structure. And then of course there will be capacity building for Indigenous people and GEF. Just like now, we have learned something for us who have come here, but we hope that in future we can be able to have more capacity building activities. And I think as early as, I don't know what year, Esther can remind me, already GEF had started those capacity building activities, but they've slowed at one point, and we hope we can pick them up again. And then improve the measuring, monitoring and reporting tools. That is one of the other things that is expected. And of course the input into GEF strategic plans that are developed every other time. They are heavy documents, but we have to learn on how we can input into them and how we can make an impact. And the good thing is that the CEO is also very welcoming in terms of listening to Indigenous people, and that's where we really count our luck that we've been having quite some CEOs who have been very, very supportive. And the last slide which I have is just to tell you of the meetings that we are going to have this year. We have already had the first meeting, which we had in 2nd to 3rd of July. And then the second meeting we are expected to have at the end of this month. And it will go on to the, when the NGO is meeting, and it will continue. We might have the opportunity to have the council meeting also, which is attending, because they will have the NGOs will be meeting at that point. And we are continuing with the informal discussions among ourselves in meetings, in internet, in emails, and we continue to discuss among ourselves since we cannot all the time meet. But we decided that we can continue by email and so on. So I think that's what I have, and I encourage Indigenous people to try as much as possible to give us an input also where there is possible and where there is needed, and what are the priorities in the regions. Probably those are some of the things that we may need to network among ourselves. And we are happy that we have the paper here, and we can open up, and now that the international forum is also here, we can be able to even interact and send some of the information through the portal, and continue communicating that way. Thank you, Yoko, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucy.